Hi everybody and welcome back to the smartphone photography course. Welcome to part 2 of our studio photography lesson, where we're going to have a look at newborn photography, how to do lighting for portraits, for beauty as well, and how to potentially get yourself started then in the industry and make some money for yourselves with your studio photography. My name is William Eames, your course educator, and welcome to module 2 lesson number 6. Now, so in this lesson, we're going to concentrate on photographing people and babies within a studio setting. So we had a good look at, the studio in the previous lesson. We had a look at all of our different lighting accessories that we can use with our smartphones and some studio lights as well. So we're going to be concentrating very much on lighting in this lesson. We're going to kick things off by having a look at light direction. We'll talk about how you can use multiple lights together. We'll talk about high key and low key lighting, the range of lighting modifiers that are out there, and there are hundreds of them, but we'll look at some of the main ones in this lesson. We'll talk about lighting gels, add a little bit of color to your photos, and then we'll have a look at the end of the lesson at newborn photography and how you can go around and how you can get to photographing newborns, which is a lucrative area. So if you are considering making a little bit of a supplementary income with your photography, newborn photography is a great area to get into. So we'll kick things off by having a look at lighting and lighting direction. So as I mentioned, we had a good look at our different lighting accessories in the previous lesson. But for this lesson, we're going to have a look particularly at off-camera lighting. So we had a look at the kind of off-camera flash. We had a look at our constant studio lights, and we had a look at our strobes. So we're going to be looking at that type of lighting because it gives us far more options when it comes to lighting our subject, which means that we can get many more looks and many more styles from using 1, 2, 3, or even 4 lights together. So lighting direction will also help you to identify direction of natural light and how you can use that natural light as well. So understanding artificial lighting and just understanding lighting in general will go a long way to improving the quality of your portraits in particular. So starting off with just simple single one light setups. So here we've got one slightly above in front of the subject. Okay, so as we can see here in the shot, we can identify this type of lighting setup. First of all, we've got a beauty dish modifier here, which we'll have a look at a little bit later on in the lesson. But the first thing to have a look at when we're trying to identify a lighting setup is the eyes and also the shadows on the model. So here a little bit difficult to see on the eyes because we're a little bit far away, but if we're closer to the image, we should be able to see the catch light in the eyes, which will give us an idea of how many lights are used in the photograph, but also the direction where those lights are coming from. Since it's not really possible to do that, we can have a look at the highlights and the shadows here on the face. So if we have a look at the highlights, we can see very much on the forehead and on the top of the cheeks here, we've got kind of these brighter areas. These are our highlights and give us an idea of where that light's coming from, which is above the subject, slightly angled down. And if we have a look at the cheekbones, we can see the light, the shadows here, almost like a contouring just underneath the cheeks here. We could only really get that kind of fall of a shadow with the light kind of coming down directly on top of the subject. And as we can see here in this particular photograph, it is very, very flattering. If we move that light around, so let's say we try and we keep the model in the same pose for this. Say we were to move this light to the photographer's left. So it's now on the photographer's left or the right hand side of the subject, and again slightly above here, and we can see that the shadow has very clearly changed. It's shifted to go over to the photographer's right or the model's left hand side, and it's less flattering in this case. So very much again we can see that the highlights are falling on the the photographer's left hand side here, or the model's right side of the face. We've got some highlights there in the cheeks. There's a shadow on the nose, which is going off to the photographer's right, so that gives us a very clear indication of where that light direction is coming from. And then we've got that kind of harder shadow falling over on the photographer's right hand side. Okay, so let's say we try the other side then, coming in from the photographer's right, with the shadows then falling onto the photographer's left. And we can see that this is slightly more flattering. Again, pay attention to the nose. We can see where that shadow is falling off from the nose. We've got very, very hard shadow there then on the photographer's left, and all that highlight happening over on the right hand side. So by keeping the model in one place and simply moving the light around, we can begin to get an idea of what's the best way to light our model. Now things will get a little bit more complicated then when we start to pose, we start to change where our model is in the photograph. So you're going to be doing a lot of photographs to try and get the right angle and the right lighting. And I mean, if you ever work with a professional model, they're going to understand all of this anyway. They're going to start throwing poses out at you very, very rapidly, and you will need to keep up. And that was certainly a learning experience for me. One of the first times I worked with a professional model, she just started throwing so many poses at me. I really wasn't ready at all. But because they're aware of this, they know that you're going to have to go through and review these photographs and make sure that you find the best angles and the best lighting, and then kind of narrow it down and work away on that. A final light is to try one behind the subject, and this might seem a little bit odd or a little bit unusual, but this is known as rim or hair lighting. So rim or hair lighting, and as we can see very, very clearly here, so now the model is, you know, very much underexposed, but we have very much got this line of light that's separating the model from the background. So we can, it's obviously, you can see it's called a hair light because, you know, it's catching the hair and it's kind of going down on her shoulder here. So a rim or a hair light is used to separate the model from the background. Now you would not use this lighting setup on its own typically, although, you know, it can be good for kind of low key black and white photography. And if you were to turn the model so that, say, she was facing, facing towards the photographer's left-hand side, that rim light could catch her face then and give you, you know, a nice kind of silhouette type of effect. But typically a rim light is going to be used with other lights. So you create this kind of multiple light setup, as we're going to see now in just a moment. But just to quickly review, so here's our 4 different lighting directions, and you can kind of very much make a decision as which one you think is the best lighting setup here for this model. I think it's the first one, you know, really stands out. That lighting direction catches her features very, very nicely, particularly the cheekbones here. Okay, but this is, you know, the beginnings of how you can find the best way to light your model. But let's introduce more lights into this equation. Now, the key thing to remember when it comes to using multiple light setups is to start one light at a time. So let's say here we've got a softbox coming in from the photographer's right hand side, and this is our key light. So when we are using multiple lights, each light is going to have a role. So this is our key light here. Now, if we have a look at this photograph, we can very much see the catch light in the eyes coming in from the photographer's right. We have, very much the highlights over here on the photographer's right again, and the shadow falling onto the photographer's left. This type of lighting is also known as split lighting. So one light like this coming in directly from, you know, a right or left hand side, like a right angle, is called split lighting because we have a split going down the face in terms of dark to light. So this is our key light. As we can see here, it's going to be the strongest light in the photo. Let's add a second light, and our second light is going to be our fill light. So now we can see here in this diagram, you know, we've got a second light coming in here. It's at a slight angle. It's also further away from the subject and a slightly less power. Okay, so if we have a look at the photograph here, now we can see we still have our key light, is still our stronger light, But the shadows here over on the left hand side now have been lifted. They're not completely gone. We can see lots of detail here, of course. And we can also see in the eyes here, we can now actually just about see the catch light of that second softbox here as well. So this is our fill light. So we've got our key light, which is on the right, still the brightest part of the photograph. We still have shadows here over on the left hand side, which we want to maintain because it gives, you know, a little bit of perspective, a little bit of depth to the photograph. We don't want to flatten out those shadows altogether in this case because it helps to shape and frame the face. So that's our two light setup. Let's introduce a third light here, and the third light we're going to introduce is our hair, our rim light. So here we're going to use a smaller light source. We'll have a look at this type of light source in just a moment. It's not also known as a reflector, but as we can see, it's placed behind the model to try and just catch the edge of her shoulder and to catch the edge of her hair. And this will help to create what's called separation from the background. Okay, so if we have a look at the photograph here, we can see we still have our key light here, we still have our fill light here, just lifting the shadows a bit. But now if we have a look on the right hand side of the model, on the hair, we can see that there's a very distinct catch light here. The hair is being lit up, and this just helps to separate the model from the background. And it's, you know, it also adds quite a bit of style to the photograph, quite a dynamic to the shot here as well. So that is our hair, our rim light working together. And as you can see, we're doing each of these one at a time. If you try to do them all at once, it's going to get very, very confusing and difficult to manage them. I always think of, you know, multiple light setups as, you know, if you're creating the melody. So if you're a musician, you know, you might start off with something quite simple, like just writing something on a guitar. You might then introduce a bass. You might then introduce a beat using the drums, and then you might introduce vocals. It's the exact same as that. You build things up at a time. Finally, we introduce a fourth light, and the fourth light does not even light the model at all, but actually lights our background. Now what we're using here is also a gel. So we've got a kind of a, well, it's a blue gel in the diagram, but really, as you can see in the photograph, it's actually purple. So what that does, it throws light onto the background, and as you can see, it gives this kind of purple background effect that also has kind of a vignette style to it. And you know, really makes this photograph dynamic. So now we've got four lights. We have our key light, we have our fill light, we have our rim light, and then we have a background light here as well that gives us just a little bit of color to the photograph. And you know, from looking at a photograph like this, you can begin to see how complex lighting can get, but it's just a case of breaking it down. So the next time, you know, you're looking through magazines and you're looking at fashion photographs, try to identify the lights in it. Try to figure out if you can see how many lights are being used in the photograph. So let's just have an overview, break these down again. We've got our one light, which is our key light, two lights, which is our key and our fill, and we have three lights, which are key, our fill, our hair, our rim light, and finally then four lights, which are one key, one fill, one hair, and one background. Now, any of these photographs could be used on their own. Okay, so there's no right or wrong here. I have to say I like that one light, that key light. I think it's a striking, strong photograph. But I also really like that final shot as well, where you've got all of these four lights working together to create this really interesting, attention-grabbing photograph. So as you can see here, there's no right or wrong, but adding in an extra light certainly changes the look, the feel, and the atmosphere of the overall photograph. And again, these are all just with the same straightforward, straight on pose. So, you know, things can become even more complex and more dynamic and more creative when you begin to change the pose of the model as well. Now, so the next thing to consider is the fact that we can also change the look and feel of the light by using different lighting modifiers. So here we're going to kick things off by having a look at a reflector. So we talked about reflectors before, but we talked about them and they're the ones that you can use to bounce light back onto your subject. But they also are a modifier here, this kind of conical shape here, that have a reflective material on the inside, which helps to concentrate that light out. As you can see, it's quite a hard light here. We can see here very much with the shadow, we've got a very defined shadow here falling on the background. We've got a very hard shadow here on the photographer's right hand side as well. So these are very much kind of standard modifier within the studio. Now we can modify reflectors even more by using a honeycomb attachment, as you can see here. Now, honeycomb attachments are pretty much exactly what they sound. They have kind of a honeycomb grid pattern on them, and they will diffuse the light. Okay, so this is a reflector with a honeycomb attachment, and they come, with different densities. So you can have, ones that are very tight and packed together, like in this, or you can have ones that let a little bit more of the light through. As you can see, they have quite a dramatic effect on the reflector. It really brings the overall level of the light down and creates more of a spotlight effect. Still very hard shadows here falling on the subject and behind the subject as well. Moving on from that, then we've got our beauty dish, one of my favorite modifiers to use within the studio. We had a look at it earlier on with the photographs, and a beauty dish, as you can see here, a bit of an odd looking attachment. So it blocks the light in the middle, and it pushes that light back on into the reflective dish, which is then projected out onto the model, onto the subject. So it's almost like a ring light in a way, and it just helps to spread and diffuse that light a much wider area over the model. These are particularly good for doing close-up portrait photographs, or if you're just using one single light. Beauty dish is really, really useful. I also think they work better when they're a little bit more direct, but just for the purposes of this demo, we've angled that light a little bit. You can see that the shadow is a little bit more diffused. It's not as hard as when we were using the reflector. There's a little bit more of a spread of light here on the model, on the subject here as well. Moving on from that one, a snoot, another odd looking attachment, but a snoot is very much designed for a spotlight type of effect and would be very much used for low key photography and key light photography. So we can see here it's a very narrow conical shape that really kind of pushes that light all together into a point almost, and as we can see here, creates very hard shadows. Now we can also get honeycomb attachments for the snoot light as well to diffuse that light even more. As you can see, it makes a very hard shadow, so we can see the outline of the shadow there, very defined, very hard shadow on it, and a very, very dark shadow falling over on the photographer's right hand side or the model's left hand side. So typically you'd use this with a dark background, dark colors as well, to get that type of spotlight effect, very dramatic type of lighting. Moving on then to our soft boxes. So soft boxes, one of the most recognizable modifiers in the studio. There's loads of different varieties and shapes of soft boxes. This is a large soft box, a large vertical one. Would also be sometimes known as strip lighting as well. And as you can see, it throws a lot of light onto the subject. Very, very soft shadows, almost no definition. In fact, there really isn't any definition in the shadow on the background here at all. And we can see that there's, lots of detail in the shadow part of the face here. Now, in this particular shot, the photographer's placed the light a little bit too close to the subject. So, she's getting a little bit overexposed over on the photographer's left-hand side. So you just move that light a little bit further away. But as you can see, much greater spread of light using a larger softbox. And they come in lots of different sizes and lots of different shapes to slightly change the quality of that light. So that's our variations on our lighting direction, multiple lights, and our modifiers. Let's have a look at some lighting styles that you can try out, tried and tested lighting styles for you to experiment with. Started off with a very popular one, butterfly lighting. So in this one, it's just a one light setup that we're using, and it gets its name from this distinctive butterfly shadow underneath the nose. Okay, so it just about looks like a butterfly in this case. So what we're using here, we've got our beauty dish where the light is raised. It's at an angle of about 30 degrees on the subject. As I mentioned before, pay attention to the light falling onto the cheeks, to get that kind of angle. You can see the catch light much clearer in this. But the main thing about butterfly lighting is you're trying to move and angle that light until you get that distinct butterfly shape underneath the nose. And it's a very, very flattering one light setup. If we're to modify this ever so slightly, we can angle that light a little bit more, and we can do what's called loop lighting. So all we're doing here is we're just moving that light around a little bit. So in this particular case, we're moving it over to the photographer's left hand side, and we're just moving it until we get that distinctive loop shadow underneath the nose. Okay, so model hasn't moved. All we're doing is moving the light, and we're just moving it around until we see that shadow move over and give us that distinctive loop lighting shadow. Now we can also do this by angling the model as well. So if we begin to turn the model, we can still obtain that loop shadow here as well. So again, in this particular case, we've both moved the light ever so slightly. We've moved it now over to the photographer's right hand side. We've also angled the model ever so slightly here as well, but we can still see that we've got that loop lighting. It's almost in between loop lighting and butterfly lighting in this particular case. So very, very simple one light setups there: butterfly lighting, loop lighting, and then angled loop lighting as well. And there you go. You've got three lighting setups instantaneously using a single light setup. So as you kind of continue on with this, when you're getting more familiar with these different lighting setups, you're going to have a shot list in your head of ones that you can try out straight away with your model that are tried and tested. Let's move on and have a look at some more complex ones. And one of the most popular ones out there is Rembrandt lighting. Now, what I'll say about Rembrandt lighting and any kind of lighting like this is you should definitely check out the old masters. You should check out the Dutch masters in particular, like Rembrandt and some of the other Dutch masters like Vermeer, because their use of lighting was incredible, and they can be great sources of inspiration trying to replicate what they've done in their paintings in the studio. I'd recommend checking out some of the Renaissance artists and checking out Caravaggio and that as well, and his use of lighting in his paintings to get some inspiration too. But Rembrandt lighting is a particularly popular one because it has this distinct triangle of light that falls underneath the eye and joins with the nose and the cheek shadow to create this triangle. Okay, so that's what's distinctive about Rembrandt lighting. So let's see if we replicate this in the studio, how we achieve it. And basically what we want to do is we want to move that light and angle that light until we get that distinct triangle of light. So we're moving it around until the light the shadow, I should say, is from the nose, is meeting up with the shadow on the in this particular case on the model's left hand side of the face. So we just keep moving it around until those two shadows join together, and it should give us then this very distinct triangle of light, and that is known as Rembrandt lighting. Very, very popular one. Definitely try this one out. It gives a very striking, powerful photograph. Now, with that, we also have variations on these known as broad and short lighting. Broad and short lighting. So what we can see here, these are both Rembrandt style lighting. If we have a look at the eyes, we can still see that distinct triangle of light underneath the eye. But broad and short lighting is when we angle the light and the model in such a way where we're either keeping 2/3 of the face in shadow or 2/3 of the face in light. Now, this isn't a great example, admittedly, of the shadow version of it, because it still looks like a lot of her face is lit up. But the idea here is that the majority of her face would be in shadow, and this is known as short lighting. Okay, where the second photograph here, the photograph on the right, the majority of her face is lit up. This is known as broad lighting. So by angling our model and choosing whether to light her from the left or the right hand side, we can achieve broad and short lighting. Now this isn't just applicable to Rembrandt lighting, this is just a lighting style in itself. So you can apply this using your loop lighting as well. So if you wanted to do broad or short loop lighting, it's possible to do that as well. You're just angling the model until you get that loop of light rather than that triangle of light underneath the eye. Now, so here's just the diagrams for our Rembrandt lighting short. So we're using a reflector in this case. And as you can see, the light is just catching her nose. So we want to make sure that the light is just cutting across the nose to create that shadow and that distinctive triangle of light. So we have a raised reflector here. You can see the catch light in the eyes. Angle this until we get that distinct triangle of light. With our broad lighting then, we're just lighting from the other side. And again, we want to try and catch that light here just on the nose. But as you can see, more of her face is facing towards the light, which means we're getting that broad light in this image. Okay, now one of my favorite ones is clamshell lighting. Clamshell lighting. So this type of one, it's a slightly odd setup. This can be done with one light and a reflector, or you can do this with two lights. Have a look at the eyes here. We can see there's a very distinct catch light here, and we can very, very clearly see the two eyes here. As you can see, this is great for beauty. So if you're doing makeup or anything like that, this is a really good one to check out. So how we do this is we've got two lights, or as I said, a light and a reflector. And the lights are vertical and they're angled at 45 degrees each, or whatever angle you prefer. It's like a clam. So imagine you are the pearl inside a clam or an oyster, and you're basically in the middle. You're photographing through it. So you're placing yourself in between these two lights and capturing the model that way. So we can do this with one light as well. As I mentioned, you just simply place a reflector underneath the model, and that will help to bounce the light back up onto the model as well. So we don't need to have two lights to do this, but a reflector and one light, you can achieve this look as well. This is, as I mentioned, a great one if you're doing beauty photography. As you can see, it gives a nice flat, even lighting. Very, very nice catch light in the eyes here as well. So very distinctive catch light here using our clamshell lighting. Now, high key lighting is any type of photograph where we've got a very bright photo. So high key is reference to anything that's very bright or very, very colorful. So here we have three lights set up. We've got one large softbox here falling on the model, lighting up her quite evenly lit here, and then we've got two umbrellas lighting up the background, so it gives this really bright photograph. This is typically used when we're trying to do something that's kind of got a positive atmosphere to it. It's very much used in beauty, makeup type of photography as well. You know, soap commercials would be a good one to think of. You know, if you think about those Dove commercials, they're always, you know, very bright, very white. That's high key lighting that they're using in those types of photographs. High key lighting is usually very flattering as well. So, you know, if you're doing portrait photography, you know, everyday portraits like families, people are coming into your studio to get photographed, you would typically use high key lighting. So high key lighting would usually white background or light backgrounds with, not always, but usually with a three light setup where you've got one large key light falling on your subject that's kind of spread over them, and then you've got two lights filling up the background to make sure that that background is nice and bright and white. So that's high key lighting. The opposite of that, unsurprisingly, is low key lighting. And low key lighting is when we've got kind of dark, moody, atmospheric type of photographs. Not always, but usually will be a one light setup with dark backgrounds. Like for example here, you know, black backgrounds here, and you know, with one light coming in from the photographer's left hand side, likely a snoot in this case, as we mentioned earlier, concentrates that light to a point. and just lighting up the model's face in this image. So low key lighting, dramatic type of lighting would be used, say, for doing, say, music photography, or something a little bit more serious, or an advertisement, say, again, photographing watches, typically done using low key lighting to give a dramatic type of effect. Typically not the type of lighting that you're going to use for a family portrait, but for something a little bit different and a little bit more creative, you'd be looking at using low key lighting. Now, we can get a little bit more creative then with our photography and our multiple light setups by introducing colored gels. So colored gels basically are just colored bits of translucent material that go over our lights to add different colors to them. So here, for example, we've got a mixture of colored gels here, kind of pink, purple, type of blue colored gels here to get this type of almost neon effect in the shot. So this is how they look. They typically attach using just either a clip over the light, or they'll slot in, like with these barn doors here. You'll actually get these ones that will slot into place. Okay, so they change the color of the flashlight or your constant light as well. You can absolutely get them for constant lights too. They can also be used to correct white balance. So some of them will be kind of daylight balanced here, like you can see there's a white one there. And that's to help take the color cast off a photograph. But of course they can be used for creative effects. And you can use different color gels on different lights so that you can mix them all together. And again, think about your color theory when you're doing this as well. So the colors will complement each other. Let's have a look at an example. So here we've got a complex setup here. A really, really cool photograph. We've got lots of kind of red and pink. And we've got very much a light falling onto the model's face, completely different from the other colors here in the shot. So how this one would be set up: we've got a reflector light here with a red gel. We've got diffusion panel in front of that to really help spread and throw out that light. So a diffusion panel is just like a standalone type of soft box. There's no light in it. It's placed in front of the light to help diffuse it. We've got a second reflector here, again with a diffusion panel here directing that light. And finally then we have a final reflector that's lit and angled towards the model, obviously placed above the model here. Model's looking towards that light with the blue light on it. And that's how you can get something looks very complicated, but it's not as difficult as you might think when you break it down. When it comes to studio photography, it's just a case of breaking it down, putting the pieces back together. So that's how you can introduce and use colored gels with your studio lights as well to get really, really cool looking photographs. Think about your use of color within the studio as well. You don't need to use gels to add a little bit of color into your photographs. Think about the backgrounds that you use, the props that you use, the clothes that the models are wearing as well. And again, think about the color theory that we spoke about in the previous lesson about how you use all those colors together. And it's just a case of planning and having the props and perhaps having the clothes as well, or they might be provided for you too, and thinking about how all of those colors can work together. And as you can see, these are really vibrant, really cool, really appealing aesthetically to look at. So think about this. Don't just keep things neutral with your black, your whites, your grays. Introduce those colors here as well to really make your work stand out. Now, so before we get on to our next topic, let's just have a quick look at where we are with our skills. So we've covered a lot over these last two lessons. So certainly from a technical ability, the ability to be able to use lights really will add a huge amount to your technical ability and to your creative ability as well. So we see a big jump in them. We also see a big jump in our vocabulary because we've learned lots about these new modifiers, all these different lighting setups, giving names to all of them. So big jump there too. And our advanced skills. The ability to be able to use artificial lighting in your photographs, as I said, will give you plenty of opportunity then as well if you are considering setting up a business for yourself in photography, to go down that route. And the last lesson of this module will look specifically at how you can go about that, how you can get yourself started as a professional photographer using only your smartphone. So, coming up in the next lesson, before we get to that stage, we're going to have a look at our editing again. So, we're going to be covering specifically Lightroom and Photoshop. We'll have a look at what's the difference between the two programs, why they're often used together, the advantages of using them, and we'll do lots and lots of editing in that lesson, covering some of the topics that we've covered throughout this course. So, how you can do a little bit of retouching, how you can edit your studio shots, how you can edit your food photography, and so on. So do join me for that lesson. Now, so for our final topic, let's have a look at photographing newborns and babies. So as I said, this is a really lucrative area to get into. So if you've never considered photographing babies or children or family even, it is something that you might consider now, even if it's just to make a little bit of extra money for yourself. So one thing I'm sure you've been aware of throughout this course is that there's so many accessories, there's so many lenses, there's so many extras to buy when it comes to your photography. And you should be thinking now at this stage about making a little bit of money back on your photography. And a way to do that, a great way to do that, is to try and set up yourself and own a small little studio. And a studio can be something that you set up, say, if you've got a little bit of space in your shed. I know loads of students actually who've set up studios, I should say, in their back gardens, in their sheds. You can go to visit clients, so you can actually go to their homes with small little portable studio setups, which is a great thing to be able to offer them, especially when it comes to newborn photography. And I mean, you don't need to have a huge amount of space to set up a studio for yourself. So first of all, when it comes to photographing newborns, you're going to want to get lots and lots of soft things, okay? So you're going to want to have lots of soft props, cushions, lots of blankets, lots of soft clothes, like the little knitted hat here to play around with. Now, likely parents are going to have some stuff that they're going to bring themselves with them, but you should kind of build up and you will certainly build up a lot of props as you continue and go and photograph. You should always have a lot of communication with the parents beforehand. They're going to show them what you're thinking about using in the shoot, give them options to think about what they want in the photograph, and so on. But definitely start to build these up. And I mean, this isn't something you have to spend a lot of money on. You can absolutely go and check out secondhand shops and pick up small little things from those kind of locations, and gradually put together a lot of different things that you can play around with. When it comes to lighting, you want to avoid using flash. So flash will disturb and can even scare babies. Parents can get annoyed then as well, of course. So constant lights, or LED lights, are definitely recommended instead. Our daylight is also great too. So, if you've got that option where you can be using large window light and, maybe have a reflector just to bounce some of that light back on to the baby, that's even better. But whatever option you choose, it is recommended that you avoid using flash altogether, because it can scare the babies, it can hurt their eyes, and parents definitely don't want that. So you want to go with your constant light source when photographing babies. Think about the small details as well. Think about capturing hands and feet, even like ears and noses, all those small little things too, because they don't stay that little forever. And it's definitely something, as time goes by, that parents are going to look back on and kind of that often used phrase, I can't believe you were ever that small. So this is a great example of that. Black and white is also a really good choice when you're photographing, these kind of smaller details, give them that kind of more of a timeless feel. So think about that too. Don't just do these kind of, elaborate setups with the newborns. Just concentrate on those smaller details as well to offer a bit more of a package. Think about the beds that you're using. Have baskets, have like rugs for baby to kind of lie on. Parents might have their own bed that they want the baby to be photographed in, but a nice crib could be something that makes you stand out a little bit more compared to other photographers who are doing newborn photography. So parents might specifically go, I really like the look at that particular type of photograph, I like the rustic look of it, I like the kind of organic nature of it, and so on. So think about that, think about your kind of branding with this as well. To kind of
people you want to try and attract with your photography. So, a lot of this will kind of come down to the types of beds, the baskets, rugs and all those kind of things that you use as well. Also think about toys, of course. Lots and lots of props when it comes to toys. You may not be using them so much when it comes to very young babies that are 2 or 3 or 4 weeks old, but slightly older babies, you can absolutely use toys with them as well. And like teddy bears would be the obvious one. Kind of old teddy bears, again adding a kind of a timeless quality to the photograph. I would also again try to stick with soft toys, soft plushes and so on, rather than hard toys or that. For older children, you might introduce the building blocks, kind of kindergarten types of toys, but generally for young babies, stick to soft things, nothing that can kind of put them in any type of harm's way, or that they're at risk of swallowing or anything like that. When it comes to posing, it is possible to pose babies because they will typically stay in place when they're asleep. So you're going to be photographing these babies when they're asleep. It'll be very difficult to get them when they're awake. With that said as well, you should be photographing them after they've had a feed. You shouldn't be photographing them before they've had a feed because they're obviously going to be, a little bit upset, a little bit rowdy. You want to get them after they've been fed, and they're more than likely going to have a nap. So that actually makes it easier to pose them, and they'll typically stay in that pose. Just be obviously communicative with the parents to let them know what way you're going to pose them. If they're not happy with you touching the baby, you can just direct them and let them kind of decide or tell them what kind of way you want the baby to be posed. So again, just be very, very careful. And as I said, photograph after they have been fed as well, so they're more docile and they're less likely to be crying. Older babies, let them play, let them have fun. Let them be themselves. Have lots of toys, things for them to play around and to interact with, and just keep shooting away. Let them just be themselves, get their attention now and again, so that you can make that eye contact in the shot. But play with them, or have parents play with them, so that they're kind of at ease. They're not scared by a stranger taking lots of photographs of them. And this will yield the most playful and natural photographs too. And introduce family as well. Bring the family into the shot too. So of course you're photographing baby, newborn, but you might want to bring in the parents too, so that they're holding baby. You don't necessarily have to show their faces in the shot, even just them holding them to their chests. Or you could do something more like this, a little bit more playful. Travel to clients' homes. Obviously the much older infant here. But still a great idea for a family shoot is to go to their homes, set up a creative space for them, and let them kind of play away, and then just capture them being natural, capture them having fun, and these are going to give you the best photographs than these kind of kind of static and kind of rigidly posed types of shots. But definitely introduce the family element into it as well. Now, so we're at the end of another lesson. As I mentioned, lesson number 7, we're going to be having a look at the Lightroom and Photoshop apps. I'd recommend that you download them before the lesson. They are totally free, so you can check them out, get an idea of them, and follow along then when we go through them in the next lesson. Now, well done on completing this lesson, and this week's lessons are 2 studio photography lessons. Hopefully it's given you some insight into how studio photography works, how it's absolutely achievable now on your smartphone as well. You don't need to go out and spend a huge amount of money on a camera to start doing studio photography. You will need to invest in some type of lights though if you are planning on getting into this area and making a little bit of money for yourself as well. But as usual, any suggestions, any feedback, just email us at support@shawacademy.com. Your challenge for this lesson: I want you to take a portrait using one of the lighting styles in these lessons. So we spoke about loop lighting, butterfly lighting, broad lighting, short lighting, Rembrandt lighting, high key, low key, etc. I want you to do one of these lighting styles. You don't need to use studio lights for it. You can absolutely use window light. You could use a lamp even if you haven't got access to kind of window lights or anything like that. Any type of light source that you can think of or that you can use, try and do one of these lighting styles and use the Shaw Smart Photo as per usual. So well done on completing lesson number 6. We've only got 2 lessons left in this module, hard to believe. So do join me for lesson number 7. I'll talk to you all again very, very soon. Until then, take care of yourselves and bye bye.